Good afternoon, class. I hope that everyone is well and healthy. Today, Anne and I are going to be talking about populism in the epoch of electronic democracy and social networks. So, at the beginning of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about the history of media being used by populists, specifically around Nazi Germany and the use of radio and film. Then I'll be talking about tabloids, pulp culture, magazine, television, and the transition from those kind of traditional forms of media into the age of social media. Thereafter, Anne's going to go through Twitter, social media at the moment, and the influence of fake news and false facts on populist movements. Here are some very ridiculous tweets from Donald J. Trump on Twitter. So if you're following along on the slides on your computer, please take a look at that. They're kind of messed up. So during the time of the Second World War, Nazis used radio to promote their own propaganda and anti-Semitic language. There are even incidences of violence because of these broadcasts. So radio was used by the Nazis because it was easily accessible to a lot of people, and there wasn't very much of a class divide from the poor people and the rich people in terms of access to radio, where a lot of poor people could listen to the radio at work or in public places. So the Nazis recognized this, and they began targeting their messages towards those people, the poor, and ramped up their rhetoric around the us versus them ideas, where the us is the Nazis and the Aryan race, and them being Jewish people and other minorities or dissenters against the Nazi regime. So after the Nazis came to power, they turned the radio into a hyper propaganda machine, whereas the previous government had laws in place that prohibited the use of radio for political reasons. So radio was just neutral, and it was just the facts, it was just the world news, it was just what's going on without a lot of bias. So through the Nazis' radio campaigns, they increased their share of support in different areas, especially among working people. Throughout the Nazi monopoly on the radio, they moved to block opposition voices through bans and decreditizing processes that made different views other than the Nazis' view unreliable in the eyes of the German people. So additionally, when the Nazis seized control of the airwaves, they immediately started ramping up rhetoric around violence and boycott against Jewish people and businesses, fueling rising hate crimes, and eventually the Holocaust. So this slide is mostly about cinema. So when cinema became more popular, the Nazis moved from the airwaves to the screen. So similarly to the radio, they moved to take over the film industry as well. Through purges and top-down orders, they changed all German films to elevate the Nazi Party and their idea of the Aryan race. They also banned any critiques of Nazi films. So Nazi films were the only thing playing in Germany at this time to brainwash the citizens. So a lot of the content around Nazi films revolved around villainizing Jewish people and communists, and emphasizing German purity and nature as a way to forward their idea of eugenics and genetic purity. So this media tool allowed for the Nazis to surround the German public with propaganda, furthering their support. Yeah. So some similarities and differences between the use of radio and cinema by the Nazis. So the main difference being is that through the cinema, people were shown visuals that could persuade them even further to believe the Nazis' message that the Jewish people were the enemy and the reason the world's going through a lot at that moment. But why specifically Germany was doing so poorly. They shared a lot of similarities, including the hostile takeover of both the forms of media and the type of propaganda were spread, whereas, again, it was just furthering the Nazis' goals and railing against Jewish people. It was very anti-Semitic and very violence perpetuating types of media. So through this type of media, it was the first time that electronic media was used en masse, infused with propaganda to promote their fascist populist ideologies. So this tabloid sensationalism was especially popular after the war and into the 90s, where in the 90s they started to promote anti-immigrant and us versus them rhetoric again themselves and not just reporting on what was said. So in the United Kingdom, mass media played a pivotal role in shaping discourses around Brexit, and only really focused on immigration and terrorism rather than the foreseeable economic consequences of Brexit. So additionally, many platforms scapegoated immigrants for the economic problems of the United Kingdom in the aftermath of the 2008 recession. And additionally, during France's most recent election, fake news was perpetuated on social media, similarly to the 2016 United States presidential elections. So as you can see, through the use of tabloids, they perpetuated a lot of populist rhetoric since after the war, and kind of focused on those sensational headlines and not really verifying their facts. Around more traditional news, across Western Europe and North America, traditional and reliable news, such as a lot of cable news, has pushed out a lot of sensationalized rhetoric and focused more on facts and logic. This isn't always the case, but compared to tabloids, it is a lot more reputable. So this has combated the influence of online sources, but as the world continues to transition from television to smartphones, traditional media sources such as newspaper and cable news are continuing to have less of a reach than they do at a moment as people turn to social media news sources instead. So the current trend around media information is changing from more traditional styles such as the radio, film, and television to mainly social media. This is changing the way millions of people are processing information and how they receive information. They have allowed populists from the whole political spectrum to create platforms and reach social media users with ease, and a lot easier than television shows where the big companies choose what candidates and what leaders are on TV. So it's a lot easier for populist leaders to use social media. Imagery is another extremely important tool for populists. So they like to be seen with thousands of people or visiting small communities. So they're seen as one of the people, they're for the people, they're against the ruling elite. they're with the working class people of their country. So the collision of social media, populism, and the increasing politicization has created more filters and fake news isolation for many people, where they're only receiving falsified facts, they're only receiving biased information, and not necessarily the actual truth. So we can all see how that's a very unhealthy system that could lead to a lot of real world damage. So, on another hand, populism has found another media source to use: fashion. At this moment, the most recognizable fashion statement from the right-wing populist is the Make America Great Again hat. This ball cap has been the outcome of some extremely effective campaigning and trend setting from Donald Trump's campaign. The politicization of fashion has been used to get populist messages into pulp culture and appeal to a variety of generations, which in this case of the MAGA hat was associated with Donald Trump's presidential campaign. This part of the modernization process of right-wing populist movements has been effective with youth and makes the movement more digestible for moderates. For example, the image of a person with a right-wing populist salute is being replaced with Trump merchandise and the MAGA hat instead of the old skinhead look that was commonly associated with right-wing extremists and neo-Nazis. So this transition in politicization in fashion has made the populist movement more appealing to more moderate people and further increasing their support. So here we have some discussion topics. So I have 2 questions that revolve around what I talked about. So the first one is, do you think that new strategies of using media is increasing support for populist movements compared to traditional methods? Personally, I think yes, that the new strategies of using media is increasing the support for populist movements because it's reaching a broader audience. The movement is modernizing and reaching different demographics and different groups of people in different ways using different rhetorics, usually focusing around anti-elites and anti-immigrants, us versus them rhetoric. The second discussion topic is a comparison between social media platforms or cable television in which is better to receive information. For me, I don't really know the answer to that. I feel it varies from source to source, but please comment on how it could be different if one is better than the other.
So since we're looking at how technology affects populism as a whole, I'm going to start with online newspaper articles and then move on to how Twitter affects it. So a lot of people these days are looking at online newspaper articles instead of physical papers or news broadcasts on TV. And usually that's totally fine. There are lots of reputable sites such as New York Times, CBC, and others. However, a lot of the time, being the first person to report something is more important than being correct. And another point is that populist newspaper priorities often differ vastly from other news platforms. So I've got a comparison here. This is a screenshot from Fox News online paper. It's entitled, "Stephen Colbert Calls Trump a Monster Over Coronavirus Response." So this article goes on to describe a tweet that Trump made a couple of weeks ago, comparing the coronavirus to the common flu, saying that the former wasn't nearly as worrisome as the latter, due to the numbers not being the same. It does acknowledge that the WHO declared the coronavirus a pandemic. However, it sort of makes light of the situation and assures people that it's not too late, that Trump has this under control. So it really is meant to relate to the people, and like looking at how Stephen Colbert is just some person trying to take down Donald Trump on his TV show. This was the first link that came up when I looked up coronavirus Fox News, and it only has 2 links in the entire article, one being for the Fox News app. This is a screenshot from the CBC News site. It's entitled, "Coronavirus, WHO calls COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic, warning of bigger numbers ahead." The article makes clear the severity of coronavirus and says that countries need to double down and we should be more aggressive. Before the article even begins, it provides 8 different sources with more information on COVID-19 and its updates. There are 17 additional links throughout the article, and there are several subheadings to keep people updated on what's happening around the world. These 2 newspapers are reporting about the same issue. Both of these were the first links when I looked up coronavirus with the related news site. However, there are very different takes on this, and I feel like a lot of people who are followers of populists will look more at Fox News or sites such as that, and will get much different information than CBC News. And so that's just kind of an introduction to how populists use online sources differently than other political people. So why use social media? The concept of social media fits perfectly with populist ideals. It's non-hierarchical, so everyone is seen as equals and there are no quote-unquote elites. It's cheap and unmediated, so populists can be less formal with what they're saying. An example being Donald Trump, which we'll get to later. It also offers a closer connection to the people, allowing populists to seem even more involved in the average person's life and even more invested in bettering their lives. A 4th point as to why social media has become preferred as an avenue for communication between populists and their people is that it allows populists themselves to shape their own messages without having them skewed by reporters of traditional and mass media corporations. So there are a lot of social media sites that are used by populists, such as Facebook is a really large one, but we'll be focusing on Twitter for this presentation. A really popular strategy with populists on Twitter is to attack the quote-unquote elites and relate to the quote-unquote people. So here we have a tweet by Donald Trump from March 8th of this year, saying, "The New York Times is an embarrassment to journalism. They were a dead paper before they went into politics, and they will be a dead paper after I leave, which will be in 5 years. Fake news is the enemy of the people." As it is unmediated, Trump is free to trash any mass media corporations that he wants on Twitter. He is portraying his populist ideals by not only making an us versus them mindset against the New York Times and journalism in general, really, but also relating to quote-unquote the people. Trump is calling the New York Times an embarrassment to journalism when we all know that they're a fairly reputable news source. They've been around for years. Calling it the enemy of the people is really the biggest populism element that he could bring to Twitter in this tweet. So people's attention spans are lessening almost every day. It seems people would much rather read a simple tweet or even a headline of a newspaper rather than watch TV, watch the news on TV. So they look at what the main idea of whatever story is going on without looking at any of the details. So by using Twitter, populists can really frame a story in a certain way, and people will read that little tweet and just believe whatever they say because they're too lazy to look into it more. So hashtag populism. The hashtag is a popular element of Twitter. It draws attention to issues and can start social movements which lead to justice. An example of this that we talked about in our last class together is hashtag #MeToo. This was a social movement that started years ago, but really only became popular about 4 years ago when celebrities started to get involved. It involved people adding the hashtag #MeToo to a tweet to say that they had experienced sexual assault in their lifetime. And its goal was to get justice for people who had been sexually assaulted. Recently, Harvey Weinstein was sentenced to 23 years in prison, and as he was a huge case in the hashtag #MeToo movement, this was seen as a win for people. So hashtags are used by populists to gain a larger following and to show people that they're working on the issues that the people want solved. There are 3 popular populism tags. The first is partisan tags, which are hashtags that are related to a specific party. For example, Tim Hodak used hashtag PCPO for Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario in almost every tweet that he tweeted. Additionally, Stephen Taylor encouraged Twitter followers to tweet hashtag R of T, meaning right of Twitter, to expand the right-wing community online. In this way, you can see that they're trying to promote their own parties using the hashtag on Twitter. The second option is political tags. These are added to tweets about a specific political event that is coming up. For example, hashtag NS election was a hashtag used to promote the Nova Scotia election. The third option is personal tags. This is perhaps the most populist tag, as it allows quote-unquote the people to see the populist in their everyday life. These tags are relatable and can prevent populists from being seen as elites to their people. An example of this would be tweeting about an afternoon out or a favorite sports team. Trump has another method. Rather than using hashtags, which I didn't really see him using, at least recently, he uses all caps. His first quote here is, "The world is at war with an enemy, with a hidden enemy. We will win." This was made March 17th, just this past Tuesday, and is in regards to the coronavirus pandemic. The all capitals "we will win" quote reinforces his stance that he and the people in America are one entity and that he is doing his best to make the people feel safe. He creates an us versus them mindset in regards to the coronavirus, calling it the hidden enemy of America and saying that together, with him as their leader, America will persevere. The second quote here is from earlier today, I believe, and he says, "I only signed the Defense Production Act to combat the Chinese virus, should we need to invoke it in a worst-case scenario in the future. Hopefully there will be no need, but we are all in this together." Again, he reinforces the togetherness of America, as he did with "we will win," promoting himself as the leader that's going to keep America together and ensure that they get through this pandemic successfully. However, he also reinforces his us versus them mindset by calling the pandemic the quote-unquote Chinese virus. As we all know, the two most popular terms for this pandemic are the coronavirus or COVID-19. By calling it the quote-unquote Chinese virus, he's feeding into xenophobic ideals. By using all capital letters for quotes such as "we will win" and "together," Trump is portraying populist traits of us versus them mindsets and fighting for the people, trying to do what is best for them to keep his country safe. So we have a couple of discussion topics. The first one is, do you think that social media platforms have had a large influence on elections and politics in general? And the second one is, do you think that the youth of today will steer social media away from the right-wing populism that is present now? Let us know what you think.